Right. Okay. Lots of people joining saying, "Hey, Billy."
Hey, everyone.
So, am I right? Last time we spoke, were you sort of fitting that out for Atmos? Is that where you were at with your home studio there?
Yeah. So that's a kind of a new addition. So it's been, I guess you can't really see, but it's been slowly taken over by. Let me pull this off here. Slowly taken over by various speakers all throughout. So and in the ceilings and all the good stuff. Still kind of getting it tweaked and set up and tuned and all that good stuff, but it's there. It's coming.
Right. So, are you working in Atmos now, or is this you're almost there?
I am, because I've been able to, I mean, you can do so much of it, and it's good to start with headphones. And then I've also had a place that I can go to should I need to hear it, before I had all this set up. But, I mean, I have basically when I say like dialing in the system, basically I'm just getting used to the sound of it. It's kind of, it's a new experience for everyone, but also for all of us working in it too, having, things firing at you from the back and above is still kind of like figuring out like, oh, okay, now what am I supposed to do with that, or how is that supposed to feel? So yeah.
What was the first track that you tried to do in that regard?
um so I've done a couple for it's been a couple different things. I went back and just in experimenting just to get used to like literally the process, because the one thing I've found is that I have a couple friends that are like, oh yeah, when somebody asks me to do Atmos, I'll just go to Studio Has It and just try it. And it's like, yeah, it's completely different than mixing anything else. So I really did some just test tracks of various other things I've mixed, and finding the things of kind of like the ways that like I think are best to approach different things. Like I had one that was essentially a very just kind of like dancey track, kind of like an EDM-ish kind of thing. And that lends itself really well because none of that exists in the natural world. None of those instruments are like actual acoustic instruments. So they can be flying all over the place and you don't really, lose a kind of a cohesiveness that sometimes if you have a live drum set trying to spread that around a room, it can get a little funky. So, just kind of experimenting with those kind of things and figuring a lot of that out.
Okay, kind of. It's a bit of a cliche, but it kind of feels that the one the one constant is change. Is that the way that it is for your career as well? That you're always having to adapt.
100%. Just in the formats, it is kind of like, I mean, when there was first mono, then stereo, there was that short, low, brief period, there was quad, there was 5-1 in the early 2000s. Again, and they were always kind of redefining like how things are supposed to be done. But just personally, yeah, I mean, everybody, it's kind of like nobody just comes in at the position that and doing the kind of stuff they want to do. And so, whatever growth you get there, you kind of just get used to the fact of like, you know, um, if anything, it's like if I'm doing, you know, in 2 years from now, what I'm doing right now, that might be a problem. You want to keep growing, you want to be doing even more, that you just kind of get used to it. That it's sometimes it starts to, as you start to get closer to like what you want to be doing, it starts to slow down and taper off because you're close to that, but you still always want to find things. And so that's kind of been the cool thing of that most that it's like, okay, it's a whole new skill and a whole new thing to learn, but it's also just kind of new opportunities that it brings too.
Yeah. What's the most exciting change you think that's happened in your career?
Um, you know, Probably actually beginning of the pandemic, I focused a lot more on mixing than
Okay.
recording. And you know, for a number of different reasons, pandemic being one of the biggest ones, but that actually made it a lot easier because it was harder to find people who wanted to go into a physical studio, but everybody started recording at home and then realizing like, oh, I don't know how to mix this. So so and really it's interesting because kind of like what I got into music to do. I mean, I love recording, but um when I thought like, oh, this is a career I want to do, it was like late 90s, early 2000s. The face of music has changed a lot since then.
Mm.
I was picturing, being in a studio, miking up like drums, sitting in a studio with a band for like 3 months at a time, and like, doing a whole album in a clip like that. And it's just not that it's good or bad, but just things aren't done that way anymore. And unfortunately, a lot of tracking has become a lot more, in a lot of cases, a lot more technical, or at least it can be easy to fall into the trap of just being more technical. That as you're no longer like, it's no longer the engineer's job to decide how are we going to mic up this guitar amp or how are we going to record this piano. All that's coming out of a producer's laptop. You know, not to say that an engineer has to have like, it's not to say that I just want to put my sound on anybody or anything like that, but it does say that's one less part of the equation that I'm a part of. And often engineering, and especially in pop music today, it often just comes down to just recording vocals, which is great, but that too also just becomes a very technical process because the speed and like repetitiveness of recording vocals versus say tracking a live band, they're two just different ball games. So mixing
Mm.
kind of gets you back to that, like, oh no, now we're back to like we're kind of touching the whole mix and shaping and all that kind of stuff that when you do work with a band, you're doing that while you're tracking, like how you record all the instruments is and the levels and what kind of like rough mix you put on or whatever processing you print them on, that it ultimately affects the end mix. And so getting back to mixing now allows you to kind of to be back a part of that process, which I just find more creative and more rewarding.
Yeah, nice. You mentioned that sort of late 90s, early 2000s period. And I think I
Mm-hmm.
read with you where you were where you were saying it was around about 2000 while you were still in high school that you decided engineering was for you.
Mm-hmm.
What was the catalyst for that decision? Was there one event? Were there a chain of events?
You know, so like many people back then, I was in a band. I was the drummer. I was a terrible drummer, but I was the drummer, which meant that we always practiced at my house. And, a friend bought a 4-track cassette recorder, if you remember those little
Yeah.
Tascam 4-track, and, and like 2 microphones. And we started trying to make demos. And I slowly started realizing like I was more interested in like, how do I record all this than I really cared about playing. And
Mm.
so in my parents' basement, I was able to kind of build a little bit of a studio, um, and I record friends' bands, and and I started just eating it up. I mean, this really
I think we've lost your audio there. There he is. Okay.
I was I was eating it up. A big influencer on me is I mean I grew up a big Metallica fan, and that documentary of the making the Black Album, I broke the tape. I just kept rewinding it, being like, oh, what is that? And what are they using on that? And how are they doing this? And I just became obsessed. And yeah, I realized by the end of high school, like I loved music, but I found that I loved making the recording of music more than I even actually liked playing. Like I didn't have much interest in continuing to play drums. I mean, it's fun. I like doing it, but the thing that really got me excited was recording a drum set, not playing it.
Right. Was there a clear path then into how you made that a profession? Were there people around you that had done it? Did you know anyone that you could talk to, or did you just have to forge your own way?
So I in high school, I my high school was actually pretty cool. They had a program called like mentorship, where essentially you just do an internship. And I found a studio. I grew up on the East Coast of the US. I went just outside of DC in like Baltimore, Maryland. And so there was a studio up by Baltimore that I did my mentorship at, which meant like every day for school, I got a little bit early and I drove up there. The only thing is, it was kind of cool to get in a studio and be around. The only thing was that it was this thing called the Sheffield Institute, and it was actually a trade school. So they were a commercial studio, but they also had a school aspect to it, which was really cool. You got to learn all that, but I didn't necessarily see a lot of like working sessions.
Mm.
But I at least got to be around studio and equipment and talk to people who did this kind of stuff. And so yeah, I went to college. I went to MTSU and I studied, engineering. And again, it's just getting around people who want to do it. When I was in college, I did a number of internships at all different studios, and then after graduating college, I stayed in the DC. I moved back to the DC area for a couple of years. I ended up basically there was a studio that I ran as well as like engineered at, and then I also helped create a studio at a school there, and taught and engineered there, um, until basically it was decided to kind of pick up and move to LA, which I had to start all over again. I went and started at a studio at the record plant in LA. I started as a runner, so I went from literally managing studios and teaching people to getting coffee and cleaning toilets, for 3 years, and then
Wow.
worked my way up, through assisting and then engineering, and then just goes from there.
Yeah. There was just a comment in the from Music on Mine saying, "Will we be posting this live later?" We will be. We'll also be putting on Jaxsta's YouTube, so yeah, you'll be able
Great.
to. Um, so it's so interesting because I know when you went to LA, ended up at the record plant, which is
Mm-hmm.
such an iconic studio. What was it like? Even though you were walking in there as a runner, but what was it like just walking in there on that first day? Was it intimidating? Was it exciting? Did you feel like you belonged? Can you remember what the emotion was?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit of both because it was kind of like, I had been in some bigger studios like in Nashville where I went to school outside of Nashville. So I'd seen some big commercial, studios. but then, you know, the studios I worked at in DC were like, they were smaller studios. They weren't necessarily, and like, it was mostly local acts. And it was interesting because it was kind of like, you're always like, kind of like, you know, and all the people I worked with there was another engineer who worked there, and he had worked at a couple other studios around like Philly and all these kind of like smaller studios, and, you know, making a living at it. But it's one of these things where it's like, you know, you only like imagine what like a real U-47 sounds like, but nobody had one, you know.
Right. Yeah.
You know, we had some 87s, but they were like the AIs, and everybody always said the vintage ones were better, but I had never heard a vintage one. I couldn't weigh in. And so you go to a record plant and you're like, oh no, this is like what everybody's talking about. This is like, this is it. This has got all, you know, the gear, all the fun toys, but also, you know, it was the first, just like, I mean, it just, the record plant does not take like independent artists. It is only major labels. So it's only major artists and acts that were working there. So it's kind of like every day, like everybody walking through, it's all just like the top of the music industry. And like that's intimidating at first, but it also gives you that excitement. It's also like, all right, I think I'm in the right place then, you know, like, because
Right.
that's when I moved to LA, I kind of was like, all right, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to pick up and move all the way across the country. I didn't know anybody in LA. I didn't really have a big plan. Like I didn't have any job before I came out here. I had to come out because nobody would hire you until you know, you actually were living out here, because so many people were supposed to move and didn't. Just studios, just they won't hire you if you don't live here. So, you know, I had to come out here on just all on faith. And it was kind of like one of those things where I was like, all right, well, if I'm going to make this big jump, it's like go big or go home. So I didn't look at kind of like the smaller studios that do like writer rooms or small productions or independent kind of stuff. I was like, no, there was like 5 studios that I was like, these are the ones I'm going to interview at. I'm going to badger these people until they hire me. And like, you know, of like 3 months of calling every single day until finally I got an interview, and then
Wow.
finally a call back. But yeah,
Wow. Real
yeah.
persistence. So you
Yeah.
mentioned that you were instantly surrounded by the top of the music industry. Who are you like? Who are you looking at? Who are you seeing?
So when I first started there, I came out in 2011. Um, this was when so will.i.am was there a lot, you know. This was as he was kind of like wrapping a lot of the P stuff, but he was doing a lot of his independent stuff, and he was like, he's a big collaborator. So the people that he always had pulling through all the time, they had a lot of just like huge producers there. Dr. Luke started coming through all the time, getting to see some really, you know, him working with like all amazing artists. Get to see uh you know, various producers like one of the first ones I started working with was like Jason Evigan, and he's done, I mean, so many huge, countless big hits. But like, you know, just watching these people come through, and also the thing that you get when they come through is like, oh, this is just a person, you know,
Mm.
like as much as you're like, oh, there's this air moment, and of course, all the artists, there's, you know, massive artists like that's when you're seeing like Lady Gaga come in, and you're seeing, you know, Chris Brown, and you know, all these the biggest artists of any given moment are the ones that are like booking there, and it's kind of cool because you do see, all right, so that's what that's like, but also you get this thing of like, especially once you're in the room with them, you're like, you're just a person. You're an artist who's trying to make art. You know, like some people put this huge air on it, and they think, you know, have all of these like conceptions that like, oh, everything's so different with them, and it's, you know, their lives are going to be different things, but all of our lives are different than each other's lives. But really, at the end of the day, we're all just people, and like they're artists, and they just are trying to make art. You know,
Abs-
um, and it's kind of funny because like everything you're doing in like the demo studio, you know, that was doing in DC with the local artists, like they're artists trying to make art. These are just people who have been a little more successful, you know, maybe have a better understanding of what they're doing sometimes, you know, because either they've done it for longer or because, you know, they've been fortunate to work with people who know how to do this, who can help them with this. But it's definitely it's one of those things where like they can, you know, you're still just like a singer's a singer and they're singing, you know, some are, have like different talents, some have different things, but at the end of the day, it's like these are artists, and so it just means, you know, like as much as I was like, oh, this is like the big leagues, it's like it is, but it's also making records. Really, all this comes down to.
Yeah, it's a big learning curve, and that's an important lesson to learn.
Yeah.
Um, I just I can see some comments. Senecta, I can see you in the comments coming up the screen. We're not ignoring your comments, but just trying to keep the conversation flowing. And if you have a question, then please towards the end put it back in there, the comments, and I'm sure we'll be able to get to it. So Billy, so you're at the record plant. What was the
Mm-hmm.
first credit? What was the first real credit that you got there? For your engineering work or for your tracking work?
Um, I mean, you get a lot of, assisting credits when you come through assisting, but in all honesty, well, I don't say you get a lot because actually, as you and I've talked about, as crediting is hard to get. It's hard enough to get a credit as an engineer. Getting an assistant credit, that's nobody cares about that, So, um, unfortunately, there's a lot of albums I worked on that my name isn't on, but I made my peace with that. I think one of the first sessions that I did there, um, I had two very early ones that kind of were pretty cool that like were very interesting to me. The first one was with Jason Evigan, and he's just an awesome person, but also just the way he works is a lot. I wouldn't say it's a lot different, but it is different than a lot of other producers. He likes to write with the person in the room. He's very vibe, but he works very fast, and he's very, and there's like no ego. It's just he comes in. It's like we're gonna make an awesome song, and he just makes really great. Um, he just kind of like goes. You can tell he's just really tapped into like going with his gut. Um, and so that was like probably like the first thing, and that was with an artist. Um, well, it's funny, with Becky G. And this is actually before she did a lot of Latin stuff, but she before started doing a lot of English speaking stuff. So these, I don't even know if those records went out, but we made them. And I also did a JoJo record with him too. But then not long after that, I actually got to do an album with, there was this group called Banks and Steels, and it was Paul
Oh yeah,
Banks from the band Interpol
yeah.
and the RZA from Wu-Tang Clan. And that actually, because they kind of came back a bunch and we did a lot, and that was like heavy, like, because that was heavy tracking. Like when I got like the loadout for the first session, they're like, all right, you're getting a drum set. We want the piano in there. We got two guitar amps and a bass amp, and we're sending 15 keyboards. And it was just kind of like looking at all the inputs, like, okay, all right, we're gonna figure this out, and but it was really cool, and it was really one of those things where they just wanted to have everything ready. It wasn't like half the things we didn't touch, but it was like if the mood strikes them and like Paul wants to pick up a guitar, it's ready to go. And they were also, and they were two very cool but very different personalities, and like it was really kind of cool just working with them and their dynamic together and everything like that.
Yeah, and I think I've also around about 2013 as well. I think you also got a credit on the Britney Spears album on Britney Jean.
I did. That was an assistant credit.
That was
Um,
okay.
yeah. She was working on that record there at the record plant, and it was definitely it was cool. Got to meet her just a few times very briefly, but she was very nice, very pleasant. And that was like kind of a different, kind of records where it was kind of cool because it was not necessarily, it was like there was a core kind of team of producers, but they definitely were bringing in lots of writers, but it was more of like a collaborative thing, not so much of you get some of these records where it's like they bring in like 30 people and it's just who comes up with the best idea, and okay, that's just it. But it's not so much a collaboration, it's almost like a competition. And
Right.
that one, just the way those people worked, it felt a little bit more like a collaboration.
Right. So you're getting the opportunity to be a sponge and just soak all this up. You must have been learning
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah, I mean that's the biggest thing that like for anybody, whenever people are asking me, oh, they want an engineer, I tell them you can't be afraid to pay your dues because you learn so much from doing it. I mean, trust me, it sucks. I spent 3 years of cleaning toilets, getting food, all that kind of stuff, and it was really hard. And this is all for minimum wage, like living in a very expensive city. Like it was not easy. But just like you point out, like there's just so much that you don't even realize it at the time that you're like witnessing how all these things are done. That, like I say, I mean, they're just making records, but when you look at it, you're like, oh, here's how I see like these records. I don't want to say more successful as far as like commercial wise, but you're like, here's how they can get this much done. Like that was the one thing that's the biggest difference I've seen from real people, they're pros in this industry, is that when they go into the studio to make a song, they walk out with a song.
Mm.
Now it may not be a hit, and it may be a song at the end of the night that no, but it's very few that like really can go in and they just can't get anything like. But like a lot of times, like people are still new, developing artists. You see, they walk in a studio and it's like, I got maybe a pre-chorus,
Right.
that you kind of just see, and it's really, to me, it's work methods and it's just mindset. It's talent is almost secondary in that because there's always a spark of talent in a lot of these people, but it's really, you see like the ones who really can get it done, like they're talented, but they also have, you know, they have that, they understand like what moves the session forward and what moves them forward instead of just getting hung up on like, one line. They're like, we'll come back to that line. Let's get the song done. The song does not hinge on one line, but so they won't spend whole time just working on just just the opening to the verse, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. That 3 year period where you were cleaning toilets and running for food, were there any times where you thought, I'm gonna, maybe this isn't for me? Maybe I need to do
Every single day.
really?
I drafted a resignation letter 30,000 times. Like every day, I was just like, I can't do this. Why did I do this to myself? I had a good, comfortable life. I was engineering records. I was all, why did I do this? But you know, it was one of those things where it's like the one thing is that it was like I saw that was the one thing. And that's why I say it's like record plan was right for me because I saw the goal. I was around the engineers. I'm like, you're doing what I want to do. So I can watch what you do and really try to learn both good and bad because I've seen people engineers like that did amazing things and I'm like I'm gonna remember that and I'm definitely gonna use that and then I've seen some fall flat on their face and I'm like oh I'm gonna make sure I never do that but still it's like you're watching these people do this and you're like okay like seeing what they do all right that gives me an idea like I'm learning it and I'm also like I see like all right this is something I can do like it's easier to put yourself in it when you actually know whereas before I was just imagining what a session like that is really
Yeah,
like now I'm actually seeing it I'm like all right I know like I can get there I can be
yeah.
ready for that.
And so when did you feel safe? When did you feel secure? Like, all right, I'm gonna be all right with this.
um it's funny because especially if you come out and work in a market like this in LA it's very easy to get burnt out so you kind of go from that I just want to work I'll do anything to like get these opportunities to all of a sudden oh my god like what am I doing I can't even like I don't have time to do anything because it's because everybody when you're starting you just say yes to literally everything you're just yes I'll do whatever and that was a big lesson that I had to learn too is that it's just kind of like not every session's right for me as an engineer that like just some things are it comes a lot of times it just comes to personality I'm not going to click with them they don't click with me and that's fine
Mm,
and you often won't know that like I can't like listen to an artist's record and know whether I'm going to get along with them or not so you do a session and if it doesn't work out okay it doesn't work out but when it does it's like okay this is like really great and like I see like this is somebody I want to work more with but you end up basically getting um I'm sorry, I got off track, but you essentially learn, when you're seeing, oh, when I feel comfortable, like when you start realizing that, like, yeah, there's like sessions I shouldn't be doing, that is
right.
kind of like, because when you get in this thing, like, I'll just do anything, and you're literally just trying to survive. You're just like, I'll just do the session, and I just want to, my goal every time day was like, I want them to love me by the end of the day, but like, what happens is like, and that still is always my goal when I walk in the session. Like, I want you to love this session. I want you to love this record. I want you to have a great time today. But when I finally like felt comfortable enough was when I was like, you know what, this didn't go well, and it wasn't because of me. You know, that's
Yeah,
that is kind of like when I had like a couple bad sessions, and I'm like, I know I didn't screw that up. There was times where I had a bad session. I'm like, I dropped the ball. I shouldn't have done that. But
right.
there was times where it's like, no, no, no. I know I did this right. I know what I'm doing. Like this is definitely like we just didn't click, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
But it just didn't work out.
Okay. One of the artists who you've clearly clicked with is Ariana Grande, who
Hmm.
you do a lot of work with, and there's a real sort of partnership there, and a teamship, I suppose.
Yeah.
On what level did you connect, or do you connect?
It was kind of a slow build, but it was so when I first worked with her, it was on the Thank You Next album, and literally it was just I worked at record plant, and basically I was at the position there where I was kind of like the engineer that they referred to if you booked and you need an engineer. There's a few people that they all like would refer, and so I was one of those, and so I just got the referral, um, and it went well. We got the record done. I think it was probably ended up being like because they had spent a couple like a month maybe in New York starting the record, so and they had done a lot of the work there. So I think we ended up probably working like 2 months maybe.
Mm,
But then the producer Tommy Brown, just he and I clicked, and so we started working more immediately after that. But Ari and Tommy are close, and so it was kind of one of these things where it was just kind of like even after we finished the record, she just was always coming around. So it's just getting to know her, and then when she started up, a year later on positions, we had already, we never like formally just like, oh, we're gonna start a record. It was just kind of like before, when she was on tours, when she'd be home, we'd do some sessions. You want to do some songs. Um, when I knew like, oh, okay, she and I are clicking is when she was doing some records that didn't involve Tommy and still called me. So like the feature for Lizzo didn't have anything to do with Tommy. The song's already written, done. It's just a feature thing. But so I was like, all right, so she's not just booking Tommy and I'm the guy that comes. And so that's when she and I also kind of developed our own kind of rapport back and forth. And just really, I think it's just, um, I think, I think some of it comes down to personality. Like we just get along, but I also think it's also, kind of clues into like, I have a good understanding of like the way she likes to work, how she likes to hear things, how she likes, her vocals to be presented, and just kind of like, and just what she needs to be comfortable, which is really with any artist, that's really the struggle. It's not finding the right EQ or like getting the compression right. It's what do they need to feel comfortable, and whether that's a rough mix or whether that's the pace of the session. So, I worked with her enough to kind of dial that in with her that she just felt really comfortable, and it just, and so just more and more started working with her. And then it turned into, even when we were, she started recording herself at home, but then it turned into, she would record something at home. It would then come to me to kind of basically rough mix because, I made a template for her, but a template can only do so much in like the tone and the sound. So, before anybody heard it, she'd want me to mix it. And then we'd send those vocals off, and after we finished positions, we'd send those off, and those would go for features, and yeah, we just continued from there.
Is that kind of relationship rare?
Um, Not necessarily, because I do find with a lot of artists do realize that once they find an engineer they're comfortable with, they want, it's 100% a comfort thing, that they find somebody that they know they're comfortable with and they can be productive with, and that it just, because at the end of the day, this is their art, but this is also their business. So, going in and risking a session with an engineer they don't click with and just wasting that day, that's a loss that no artist wants to take. So
Mm.
when they find, smart ones, when they find an engineer that works really well with them, they hold on to them. Not to say there aren't some artists that are just like, whatever engineer I get today, I don't care. And, good for them. But I do feel like they are always, there's always, in any first session, there's like a little bit of it's almost like, when you start dating somebody, it's like a getting to know you phase. And there's like a couple of awkward steps everybody always makes of like, oh, you don't, oh, okay, how much, how loud do you like your voices out? Or, oh, like, just like when people say, take it to the, take it from the top of the song, top of the verse, top of the line. What does that actually mean? You got to learn all those things, and you're going to get it wrong 2 times until you figure out what the right answer is.
Yeah.
So, they have to do that every session. Whereas once they find an engineer that they know and work with, then it's like we get in and it's like, if I'm doing my job right, it feels like I'm 3 steps ahead all the time because I
Right.
already know what she wants. I know what the way she likes to work. I'm paying attention to all the things that like, what she wants, and knows like when she asks her certain things, this is what she means. When she wants something else, that's what she means.
Yeah. So is that what, when someone comes to an engineer such as yourself, is that what they want from you? They want that that you're on the same wavelength. They obviously clearly a technical ability, but there's more to it than just having a good technical ability. There's a management, like a personality management sort of aspect to the job that you do, I presume.
Absolutely. I mean, you're kind of the technical part is like the first thing to kind of master, and ends up being like the smallest thing, because yeah, it's 100% personality. And like I say, sometimes there's those barriers that you're just not going to get over, and that's when I'm like, all right, well, that's artist and I just don't click.
Mm.
But it is kind of like, I'm not a therapist, but my goal is to try to get in their not so much get in their head, but figure out where their mind is at in their mind space. And I'm trying to help manage that for the session, in the sense that I'm trying to keep them comfortable and creative the whole time. So I don't want things that, if there's something that I know bothers them, I want to try to eliminate that so that we can keep moving, So if, and so that also comes down to like, sometimes you got to be paying attention to the room too. That like, if like something in the room is bothering them, you need to kind of fix that. If there's, it's rare, but if it's like, oh, there's like an assistant that is not getting along with the artist, sometimes you got to ask the assistant, hey man, I'm good. Why don't you hang out outside? Clearly this is the problem. But those are the things as the engineer, you do need to stay in touch with, because if you don't, what ends up happening is, they may not blame you, but a bad session means you didn't do your job right, and if people walk away upset and unproductive, then you didn't do your job right.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you think about some of the artists that you've worked with, an incredible range of artists from Ariana Grande, who we've just spoken to about, through to Lana Del Rey and Nick Jonas and Selena Gomez. What is there? What do you observe about? You know, these are all people who are at the top of their game. What do you
Hmm.
observe about them? Is there something they have in common, like a trait that just helps explain why they are where they are?
I think for any artist that's usually at that caliber, the biggest thing is that they know who they are. You know, that when they come in, they're if they're gonna come in and like if they're picking a song, they already know what speaks to them. You know, they're not focus grouping it. They're not like, well, I don't like this song. It sounds like a hit, but I don't like it, you know, but
Mm,
I'll sing it anyways. Whereas I've seen artists being like, that's gonna be a massive hit, but just not for me. You know, like they listen to it, they hear the potential. They're like, I know this would be a big record. I just don't hear myself on it, and I just can't do that. You know, all those artists, they know their voice. They in like in their like artistic voice. They know, you know, kind of you know, just like what they want to do. And so it's really just allowing, you know, they don't waste their time. I mean, everybody obviously for any album of say 12 songs, there's 30 that nobody will ever hear because they tried it, they did the song, they didn't like it, goes in that folder that never gets opened again. Um,
right.
but you know, those are, but still, and then being able to make that judgment of like doing the record and then being like, no, I know we spent, you know, 2 days on it, but no, it's not going to work. You know, I don't like it. So there's been songs where it's just like, that is an amazing song. And just, but the artist is just like, I'm not going to do it. It doesn't match. It doesn't work with like what I want to do. And it's like, that's how they do get to those because they're in touch with who they are as an artist and they know
Mm,
what works for them. So, you know, hearing, say, you know, Nick Jonas trying to sing a like, you know, Selena song may not match because they have very different sensibilities. So like even though one might be, you know, even though they like even if they're both the same register and they both could sing the same song, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the right fit. And the good artists know what's a good fit for them.
right. There must be, I don't know if you see this in the studio, but there must be pressure from people around them who are saying, no, no, this is going to be a big hit. I don't care whether you can hear yourself on it or not. This is a big hit and you need to do it. So they must surely have pressures like that, which they have to ignore, I presume.
Sure. I mean, the one thing I've noticed with the really productive and really successful artists is that those kind of people who would put those pressures on them don't come to the studio. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't exist in their life, that they're not getting calls from label or an A&R. I don't know anything about any of that stuff. But
Right.
I do know that, like, you know, and I've seen the opposite. I've seen the artists that are just, you know, they're just throwing paint to see what sticks, and yet they show up with managers and, you know, an A&R is in the entire session to try to like, you know, and is like giving their opinion the entire time, and it's just kind of like, oh, I'm sorry, who is this person and why are they asking their opinion? Where you know they're trying to write a song right now. Why is this person talking about what's number 4 on the charts? You know, so the ones I found have been really successful. Like I say, in knowing themselves, they also know that when to block those people out and how to keep those people away from them when they need to, you know, be at their best.
Right. That's yeah, so interesting. And then, so when you think back to when you wanted to get into engineering and studio work, you have this idea in your head about what it's going to be like. You've now been operating at a very high level for many years now. What's the reality as opposed to what that fantasy was, do you think?
Well, aside from like what I said about how like just the music industry's changed as far as the nature of music,
Yeah.
you know, it is very kind of like it is not necessarily like when it what is expected of you is just kind of a whole different thing. Um, in the fact of like how much latitude you actually are given when you're working at this level. That like I'm not saying that like people expect you to be perfect, but they expect you to be perfect. And that's just something that I just didn't really anticipate for. Not that I was like, I'm going to go in, I'm going to make every mistake every day. But it is one of those things where like that's one of the things that I don't think I accounted for of just like no, like I had to get little things, you know, in order as far as like, you know, I don't think initially I was very organized kind of person. Um, when I was in high school in my early 20s, I was the guy who was late for everything, you know.
Right.
And then I had to learn that like no, you show up to a session half an hour to 45 minutes early, depending on if you've been to the studio before, I've never been there before, I'm showing up an hour early because I want to get everything set up. I want to get everything tested. I want to meet the assistant. I want to figure out everything I need to know about the room. And I want all my time to do all this before the artist even shows up, you know, and I don't have time to be late on that stuff and to mess around with that, that I had to kind of get that, or like before I send a bounce to anybody, I preview and check it, make sure that I didn't somehow accidentally bounce it without the vocals, because that happens. And,
Right.
you don't know unless you check it. And I mean, that's something that also got drilled into me that at Record Plant, that was a big thing of theirs, is you double check everything because everything's got to be perfect. But it's still, that's kind of one of those things where like, when I was like, oh, I want to be an engineer, I was just obsessed with microphones and compressors and, that kind of stuff. And I didn't realize like, no, it's about like file labeling and, timeliness and, maintaining energy and, and also just attitude throughout an entire session, that like realizing the way that I respond is going to greatly affect how this session can go. If my attitude changes, it can make this go good or bad, and I need to make sure I keep that in check, that like when I'm frustrated, I can't let that frustration bleed over to somebody else. If like my goal is, if a piece of equipment breaks, which it always will, especially right when you need it, is for the artist to never know that there was a problem. And if it really gets into a really bad, be like, give me 5 minutes, I'm going to switch this out and we're going to get going again, but not be pacing the room, be like, I can't believe this isn't working, and again, those are kind of things that like you have to learn, because I've seen people who didn't learn that, who somehow got opportunities to kind of work at a high level, and then it goes really poorly when like little things like that catch them off guard.
Right. Okay. You mentioned learning some of those lessons, and in terms of people that you've learned from, and I guess if I don't know if mentor is a appropriate word here, but I've seen you speaking about Brian Springer and having
Yeah,
learned quite a lot from Brian. Who was or who is Brian to you, and what have you learned? What were some of the biggest lessons you learned from Brian?
sure. So Brian, for a long time was Chris Brown's engineer. And so when I started Record Plant, he was working with Chris a lot, and Chris was a big client of Record Plant. He was there at least like 3 days a week when I was there, or at least when I started there. And, the interesting thing with Brian is Chris, the way he just likes to work is he just has a lot of people. And, some artists do this where it's like, they kind of want a party atmosphere, and it's not even so much about partying for them, because I mean, for Chris, most of the time he's in the vocal booth, but it's like he's just kind of watching on how stuff goes over, right? But what's funny is that like Brian Springer is like a really nice laid back guy, but like doesn't smoke weed, which was very peculiar in that room, um, and just was very like was not participating in the party while he was working. It was very professional, but just watching how just in like how organized and just like steadfast he stayed amongst like just chaos was like a really big thing. And like I learned, like he came in and like he had like every time he came in, he had his like routine that he checked. He checked the exact positioning of the monitors. I remember he had a thing where like he always made us move the vocal booth. We always set it up in the center of the control room, or not the control room, in the live room.
Mm.
Except at Record Plant, all of the like computer screens were not over the console at that time. They were on like those little sidecars. So you're kind of sitting like sideways to the computer, right? And the glass is over here. So he always had us move the vocal booth over here. And nobody ever knew why, but we knew Brian always wants a vocal booth there. And one day I asked him, like, is there like an acoustic thing about the room there that you like? And he goes, no, I just don't want to have to crank my head so hard. I just want to kind of just look up at the corner of my eye from the screen. But it's
Right.
like thinking about little things, like nobody else did that though. And it's like,
Right.
that makes a lot of sense. Like, you are staring at a screen all day, but you also still need to see your artist. And it's kind of just like, it makes it a lot more comfortable to just be able to kind of just glance over instead of having to completely crank your head over. And so just kind of learning a lot of things, that he had a lot of really great, just like he double checked everything every time. And it wasn't that he didn't trust me to set it up right. It's just, he knew that like, he didn't feel comfortable until he had checked it. And that's a good thing for any engineer to feel. So, just getting those habits, and he had very specific things like, if you hand him, when a producer would give him like an instrumental, like he had a certain software on his laptop that he always liked to check the BPM and the key on. In fact, he didn't trust those key finding things. He had a little rollout keyboard that he used to always test the key, and had the little speaker he would roll up to his ear in a loud control room, trying to figure out the key exactly, because you put it in, one of those key finding programs, and it's right 80% of the time. But, when it's wrong, it's like, ah, shoot. So, and then that always ticks off an artist when they're trying to sing a note, and auto-tune won't let them do that. So, he like learning, oh, he has these things. And it's not like I used all his methods, but it was more of like, oh no, he thinks about all these steps. I'm sure all of them came up when something screwed him on a session, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna make sure that doesn't happen again. And just
Right.
adopting that mind frame of like, yes, problems and mistakes will happen, but when they do, it's not about fixing them then, but then it's also be like, all right, what can I do to make sure that never happens again?
Yeah. Real attention to detail. That's a really
Yeah,
valuable.
yeah.
Um, Sorry, go on.
Oh, well, I
No.
mean, I was gonna say, and there's plenty of other engineers. He's probably the one engineer I worked with like the most. But like, another big day was, and it was only one day, but I did meet him many times, was Ed Cherney. And I met him because he was married to the president of Record Plant Rose. So he would come by, and I knew Rose well, had been to her house, so I'd met Ed many times, but I only got to work with him once. But it was a really kind of cool thing because he's, a whole different generation of engineer. But it was like watching him work, that's when I really learned the personable side. Like it was a full tracking session of like, I think it was 8 or 9 musicians. He went and greeted every single one, said
Mm.
hello, introduced himself. If they hadn't met, he'd probably met most all of them though. So trading stories, really laid back, all that kind of stuff. And it's funny because we had like 1,000 technical problems that during that day, and like privately, I saw how upset he was, but in the session you would never know. It's kind
Right.
of like one of those things of like, oh, okay, that's where I said I learned like, okay, the way I react to things can have a big effect on things. So staying at ease puts people at ease, but getting all worked up gets people all worked up. And he definitely was the king of just literally the wall could be on fire. He'd be like, all right, we're gonna do another take. So it was but he was also very like on point. He didn't make sure everything was right, everything that he control, was very like, this is how we're gonna do this. We're gonna make sure this is perfect. But again, it didn't feel like a drill sergeant thing. It was he like that's where amongst many other things I learned that was like a big thing just that day. Like, oh yeah, it's like it's weird, but a lot of times people don't even say hello. When they walk in the room, it's just kind of like a hey, and he like stopped what he's doing, got up, and greeted everybody when they walked in the room.
Right. Do you remember the artist that session was with?
It was from Bette Midler.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So it was cool. I mean, it was a tracking day that they were doing. She was doing a number of different songs, and it was kind of like a bluegrass kind of thing because they had like a fiddle, and they had upright bass, and they had like 2 acoustic guitars and a dobro and a drum set and kind of all this stuff. And it was, we were using every bit of the studio that we could use. Um, and it was also kind of cool because of how simple he kept things technically and just still how amazing it sounded. It was like I remember the drum set. Like I set all the mics up. I mean, he told me what mics to set up, but it wasn't anything crazy. It was like the textbook of like what you use. And I think he like moved one a quarter of an inch. But then I walk in the control room and like he just had it on the console. He just pulled the faders up, and it was just like, that sounds better than anything I think I could ever get. And I'm not taking like any credit for it. It's not because I set the mic. No, no, no. It's because he knew exactly how to place them. He looked and he saw, okay, and I'm sure that one quarter inch movement he made probably made the whole world of difference. And he also knew how to not overcomplicate it because he knew that drummer, he knew how they were going to play,
Yeah.
so forth. That it was just instantly perfect. It was just like, wow.
Amazing. And because that was a tracking day, was Bet there or was she not there that
She
day?
was, she was,
Okay.
she was very sweet. She is an artist through and through, that she knows exactly, she's the type of singer, she knows exactly what she needs for that day. That somebody offered her some cheese, and she couldn't believe you'd offer a singer cheese when they have to sing. That's gonna clog her up. And that's kind of one of those things that many singers today are like drinking, smoking, whatever, while they're like trying to perform, and that's not great for their instrument, but they don't know or don't care. But she knows exactly what she needs to perform that day.
Right.
So she was really cool with that.
Nice. Billy, you've been so generous with your time. Thank you. I'll just ask you one last thing, which is what excites you most at the moment? You were talking about mixing before, you're loving mixing,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously your Atmos work and your developments in the studio. Are they the kind of two areas that you're most excited about moving forward right now?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing a lot of mixing. What's really kind of fun is I've been working with some like a really wide range of clientele. There's a Japanese artist, Nissi, that I've been doing a lot of songs for. That's really kind of cool because it's a very different take. It's on just pop music in general, just because it's, at least to me, because more of a Japanese style, but also just all the songs he does are very different. You know, he kind of has one that's more of a dance track, one that's more of like kind of like a typical pop track, one that's got a little more kind of like a almost like country kind of feel to it. So, but then also there's been a bunch of other artists that are kind of doing a lot of really just kind of I like people who are doing a lot of very just different things. They're doing just not the like typical, you know, pop stuff, but just are like really just kind of creating new sounds. I mean, that's what I think is exciting in music in general right now. And I think it's really fun kind of working with this stuff and especially mixing. It's kind of fun because it's like you get these productions that are just like, it's amazing, but it's also like, what's great is there's no like roadmap for it as far as like other songs. It's not like, oh, well, this is just like a so-and-so song and that's what they're looking for. It's like, oh, this is very open-ended where they've taken this and where this can kind of go. And it's kind of fun to kind of find those boundaries of like, all right, we're doing a whole new things. Where can we push that?
Mm, nice.
Yeah.
Billy, as Koo West Music Official says, this has been a dope conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all your time. It's been so great to chat with you.
Absolutely. It's been fun.
And yeah, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, evening.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. You too.
Take care, mate. Thank you again.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye.